So, good morning, everybody. Today we are going to talk about letters, memos. I'm also going to branch off into some line spacing and some other things that you might have missed throughout the last semester or just wasn't aware of, or hopefully today's class will be quite helpful for you. So, to start off with, I want you to look at your word and I want you to see if you are in centimeters or inches. So with your ruler visible, you should be able to see if it's centimeters or inches. So right now I have mine sent to centimeters just so I can change it to inches for you. All of our textbooks and everything, even though Canada is on the metric system and we're all in supposed to be learning centimeters, our textbooks all our basic information is all set in inches. So as soon as I open up my Word, I change my default settings to be inches. So if you don't know how to do this, you're going to go to File and you're going to go down to Options. And with your options open, you're going to go to the Advanced tab. Once you're in the Advanced tab, you're going to scroll down until you see Display. And under the display category, you'll see the fourth one down here is show measurements in units of. So this is where you want to change it to inches. So once you change it to inches and say OK, now your ruler bars will be set to inches instead of centimeters. So a lot of times when we're talking about tabs, like for a modified block, it should be at 3.25 inches. Or if we're talking about margins at 1 inches or a 1 inch top, a lot of times students will open up a computer, especially if you're doing an exam at a school or somewhere else in a library or something, and it's set to centimeters. So they're using the centimeters as their guide and measurement. But as you know, 1 centimeter is not the same as 1 inch. So that you need to know. So if you didn't know that, there's your today's little tidbit for you. Now, when we are creating a memo, I always have my show hide button on. It's the backwards little P. So what the backwards little P will tell you is exactly what's in the memo. And this is how I can tell immediately what you have done. So every backwards P that appears on the screen is an enter. So if you have an extra enter here, I'm going to see it. You'll get an extra enter. It's not just seeing the blank line because sometimes that's your line spacing. And these little arrows that you'll see right here, these represent a tab. So if you decided that you were going to try and put in some spaces to line it up, as soon as I turn on my show hide, that was a mouthful, I'm going to look immediately. So without the show hide visible, this looks perfectly lined up. But when I turn it on, I'm going to say, nope, this needs to be tabs, not spaces. The reason why we really need to use tabs and not spaces is if you changed your font or your font size or anything, the character spacing for a space is different than the character spacing for a letter. The way Word is set is that each character, meaning each letter you type, has its own spacing. So even if you just looked immediately at the M and the I, you'll notice that the M is taking up a way bigger chunk of space than the I. So this is exact character spacing. So if you're using spaces instead of tabs and you need to put something in, it's going to throw everything else off. So make sure you use tabs when you're doing your memo. Okay, so to start a memo, we need to start at the 2-inch top margin. So when you're looking at top margins, you always include the header. So your header is going to be your first inch, so that's your 1-inch top margin. And then to get to your second top margin, it's 3 enters. It's not always exactly at the 1 inch, but it's about. And even in the textbook, if you read the side notes and everything, when it tells you to go to the 2-inch top margin, it always says about. Because depending on the font and the line spacing and the size of your font, that's going to change everything. So, for example, if we were going to have a heading here, like sometimes in a report, and you have and you have a heading. So if you did something in a title and you want it was in a giant size font, that's taking up a whole lot more room. So you can't use 3 enters that size. You're going to be halfway down the page. So this is how you set your top margins is you do your 3 enters in the basic font before you start anything else. Okay, so then you're going to be at the about 2-inch margin. You never change your top margin in the margins. And the reason you don't do that, so if you decided, okay, I'm going to go to the 2-inch top margin, here we go. The reason why you do that is if your document was on 2 pages, every page that followed is going to start now at the 2-inch top margin. So we never do that. We don't do it in reports. We don't do it in letters. We don't do it in memos, anything, because our first page is the only page that starts at the 2-inch top margin. Okay? To begin a memo, you're going to use the memo headings, which are to, from, date, subject. Sorry. Excuse me. So when you do your headings, the to needs to be, or all the headings, they need to be capitalized, they need to be bolded, they need to have a colon followed, and then they need to have tabs after that. That is how you set up the perfect memo. So if you had a lowercase o, that heading is not correct. If you didn't use a colon, that heading is not correct. If you forgot your bold, that heading is not correct. If you had your to with the colon but not bold, it's still not correct. This is how it needs to be. Capital, bolded, followed by colon, and use tabs and not spaces. Then you're going to have the perfect setup for your memo. Once you begin typing the memo, so you're right here and you're ready to begin, it's 1 enter. So 1 enter is going to bring you to the start of this paragraph line. Not 2 enters. A lot of people want to put in 2 enters. It's not 2 enters. 2 enters is going to give you an extra blank line. You need 1. In between paragraph, when you hit the end of a paragraph, it's the same thing. It's just 1 enter, and then you start the next paragraph. It's not a blank line in between. What we see right now looks like a blank line, and this is our line spacing. So if we were to change our line spacing, we'll just select this much. So our line spacing should be set at the default line spacing. So if we go into our line spacing options, we want to have this one is set to older style. So this one is set to Word 2008 formatting, I think. So we're going to change this now. The current default should be 8.8 points here, multiple at 1.08. This is the new Word 2016 and 2019 default settings. So when I say OK, my line spacing is going to change slightly. It just closed up a tiny bit because it was a little too big. But now if we didn't have our line spacing set and we removed it, this is why some books will say 2 enters because they're referring to the older style. So they want to give the look of the blank line in between, But if your line spacing is not set properly, you're going to have to use an enter for it. So we really need to be careful with our line spacing, and our line spacing should be set properly. So we're going to turn our line spacing back on, and now I have to remove those blank enters. And I should have set the line spacing for the whole document at the current default, which I will do after. So when we create our memo, it's one enter in between paragraphs, and then we get down to the bottom. So when you're looking at a memo, how do you create a distribution list? And how do you create if there's a copy being sent to another person? And how do you create it if it's being sent to more than one person? We use the distribution list is in the two. So the two, we would add the different names. So as you can see right now in this memo, it's going to 3 people. So the people are separated by a comma and a space, just like a comma is in any other paragraph. You can also choose to list them, but you're going to remove the line spacing if you list them. So if you list them, you're going to have to remove your commas, and you're going to remove your line spacing. And oops, when you remove line spacing, you never select the last line, because the last line, the line spacing is after, which is going to give you the blank line before you start something else. So if you have to remove your line spacing, you're only going to select the top lines, never the last one. Because if you select the last one and you remove your line spacing, oops, I'm going to add it before I can remove it. Now you don't have the look of a blank line in between this heading. So either one of those is correct. With this line spacing, of course, add it back in. Either one of these layouts is correct for the names. So you can choose to have your names listed like this, or you can choose to have them with commas. My personal preference is with a comma. So I would put my commas back, and I would have it like this, but I'm going to have to add the line spacing. And now it gives me the look that it's double spaced and everything is very clean. So once we move on into the memo, we're going to get down to the closing. So when you're into the closing of a memo, once you type your last sentence, it's one enter, and you're down to the initials. So this is where you put in the reference initials. So what you need to realize with reference initials is the first thing you have to look at is, who is this memo from? This memo is from Aaron. Okay. Because it's from Aaron and it's not from you, and you just typed it up, this is the typist initials. So this is where you're going to put in your initials. If you are the person sending this memo and the from is actually your name, then you don't need any typist initials because you are the typist. So your name is already there. So the only time you use the reference initials is if you're typing the memo for somebody else and it is not from you. Next, we have one enter, full spacing is left on, and this is where we're going to have our enclosure or our attachment. So if you're typing up a memo for an assignment or for somebody, a boss or whoever, you're going to have to pay attention to the memo. When you proofread the memo and you screen it, you're going to be looking for somewhere in it that says enclosed is, or I am enclosing. So this one says the work on this screen committee is outlined in the enclosed schedule. So now you're going to say there is an enclosure. So this is your enclosure notation. If by chance they wanted to staple it on and they said the outline is attached, then you're going to change the word to attached. If you're doing it as an electronic and you're attaching a file, it's going to be attached. So the only time you're going to use enclosure is when you're actually enclosing something in addition to this in the envelope. If it's going to be attachment, then it's either going to be an electronic attachment or it's actually stapled on and attached to your document, then you're going to say attachment. Copy. So a copy line in a memo is just like a copy line in a letter. You're going to use the copy line the same way. So you're going to put in one lowercase c and you're going to use one tab. And this is where you're going to put in the copy. So what this means is you are sending a copy of this letter to this memo to somebody else. So I'm not on the distribution list because the memo is not addressed to me. It doesn't affect me, but I might be the HR manager and you want to let the HR manager know that you're reporting an issue with these 3 employees. So you're going to copy me on the letter. And you're also letting the people know that I'm copied on this memo. Sorry, not a letter, memo. So the copy line. Now, if you had to have a blind copy, which means the person receiving the blind copy knows they're getting a blind copy, but the people the letter is addressed to don't know. It's blind, so they can't see it. So if you are sending this letter to the 3 people here, this memo, I will say letter, sorry. This memo to the 3 people here, but you want to send me a blind copy, a secret one, you wouldn't include anything here. And then after you print these 3 and you put in blind copy, you're going to put in the BC and print it again, and this is going to be my copy. So only the person getting this copy would see this on it. And you can highlight it if you want, because you want them to know that this came blind to them. This is a secret copy to you. The other people don't know better. So that's the difference in copy and blind copy. And you only have the blind copy on the document that the person who is blind copied is receiving. And it's a bit of a mouthful, but hopefully I explained that clear enough for you.